Welcome, I'm Kinetic Symphony. I hunt down and report on weird and mysterious stories, from glitches to the paranormal. This is my channel's weekly compendium, ending on Monday, October 3rd, 2022. Case file number 768, written by Wee-Oo, the Ethereal Pup. My husband and I live in a small, work-in-progress cabin in the woods on an acreage in Atlantic Canada with 2 parrots, a rabbit, a senior citizen cat, and 2 absolutely rambunctious dogs. My husband just can't say no to something fluffy that is in need of a home. Cleaning up after this zoo is quite the daily effort. As I was going about my chores today, I decided to toss the dogs outside for a while so I could suck up the previous day's layer of dog fluff without them declaring war on our vacuum machine, as their hatred for the vacuum is quite passionate. Once the dogs were outside and merrily jumping around in the mud puddles, I got to work on the floors. I did a really thorough vacuum job today, even getting on my hands and knees to suck up the fluffies that were nesting underneath the tables and furniture. After I wrapped up the chores, I went to retrieve the dogs. The dog run is accessible by a doggy door that is off of a room that is completely separate from the room I was cleaning. As I already mentioned, the cabin is a work in progress and entirely unfinished, and the room with the doggy door is the newest room to be added onto the build and is even more unfinished than the rest. I entered this room and shut and latched the door behind me, as I knew that the soggy dog stampede was going to be fierce. I planned on letting the pooches dry off in that separate room while I went to town to run a couple errands. I opened the doggy door and the 2 canines bounded into the room and began to shake and pounce and play off with all their doggy enthusiasm. They were soaked and muddy and seemingly more than content to hang out in this room, so I undid the latch on the door that led to the main room and carefully opened a crack just enough to squeeze my body through so that the dogs could not follow after me. I closed the door behind me and latched it shut, picked up the water bowl and reached for some toys so that I could toss them into the side room to keep the dogs entertained while I was gone. As soon as I entered the main room and looked down, however, I absolutely froze. There were fresh, muddy paw prints on the floor that I had just cleaned. I could still hear the dogs bouncing around on the other side of the door in the room I had just locked them into. They did not follow me. And yet, here I was looking at fresh, muddy paw prints that were not here a moment ago. I just cleaned everything. Perhaps there was mud on the bottom of my flip-flops, and I had made the prints myself? I lifted my feet one at a time, and the bottoms of my flip-flops were totally clear. The prints were not from me. Then I lifted my gaze and was horrified to see that the paw prints continued all down the length of the room from the kitchen to the front door of the cabin, where they stopped suddenly, as though a muddy dog had taken a single run through the length of the room and then completely vanished. The prints only went in one direction. There were no smudges of mud or backwards prints to indicate a muddy dog changing direction in any way, just a straight line of fresh, wet, muddy prints, and then nothing. They weren't there just moments before. My dogs had not entered the room and were still locked up in another room. There were no other creatures in this room and no possible entrances for rogue invaders. I have no explanation. I don't understand. I feel like I'm either losing my mind entirely or else in an alternate timeline. One of the dogs slips past me into the clean room and then runs down the floor, and somehow the timelines bled together for a moment, just long enough for alternate dimension dog to leave the muddy paw prints and then vanish back into his own timeline. Case notes for file 768, the Ethereal Pup. Indeed, this is a weird one. All evidence points to the notion that your dog, one of them, phased through the wall. One key detail that you do mention is that there's no returning paw prints, which means that even if your dog phased through, one of them did, they just vanished. They didn't even return back and phase through again to the room where you left them in. So, that's weird. They phased through the door, walked a few steps, then vanished and teleported back into the room? I got nothing. Maybe it is as you say. Somehow you partially glitch, or your room partially glitched into a different timeline. And in that timeline, the dogs were just roaming free in the main room, and they left paw prints. and then your reality fades back in. I have heard of people witnessing a different universe, but all the time when that happens, it's only perception. It's them being there, not the universe being in their universe. In this case, because the paw prints remained, presumably, you weren't just witnessing the other universe, it was actually there. If that's what happened. Outside of that, I don't know. Because, yeah, there's plenty of stories of pets phasing through material, through solid objects, but they don't just vanish after. That part doesn't make sense to me. Case file number 769, written by Morsoto99, Mr. Buehler's Final Steps. When I was a kid, I lived in a really tall house. There was a central set of stairs that went 4 stories high that the house was built around. My parents' room was on the 4th floor, while I lived on the 3rd floor right next to the stairs. My childhood dog, this mutt named Buehler, would climb up the stairs most nights to go sleep with my parents, while occasionally sleeping with one of my siblings on the floor below me. Anytime Buehler was walking around the house, you could hear the clacks of his paws on the wooden planks. He would never head up at a consistent time either, going from as early as 8 to as late as midnight. Fast forward, it's July 2014. I'm 17 and Buehler has just passed. The house felt really empty for a while. We had gotten so accustomed to his clacks that it was just odd not hearing them. But they kept on coming. For about 2 weeks after his death, I, along with my parents, heard Buehler climb the stairs every night. The sound was unmistakable. I had heard this noise for years on end. It was the same pattern, the same rhythm as Buehler in life, except there was no Buehler anymore. There was no weather pattern going on, the house wasn't especially creaky, and we didn't have any other pets than him. It was never at the same time every night either. When it became late July, we stopped hearing Buehler's clacks. I asked my parents if they had heard the noises and they agreed. It had to be Buehler coming up the stairs. I will say I never went to see what it was, just because I knew definitely what it was. It was Buehler going to sleep with my parents. Case notes for file 769, Mr. Buehler's Final Steps. I am sorry for your loss. Losing a pet is obviously not quite as horrible as losing a very close family member, but still, it stays with you for months, if not years. Recently, my roommate lost one of his cats. She was very old, and she seemingly just died. She was roaming outside and found her later on in the yard, and, it's very painful. It really is. I was the one that found her, so I told them, and it's never news you want to bring to someone. There is something that makes a lot of sense to me about this, in that it's repetition of routine. So if spirits are echoes, fragments of the soul of a person or pet that passed away, the idea that they would repeat themselves in the past actions that they normally took, going about and living their day as it used to progress, or maybe specific actions that they would always take every single day. Like for me, I wake up and immediately I take a shower, drink an entire glass of water. Just seems to make sense, healthy. That's a routine. So if I died and passed away and a fragment of my soul was left behind, maybe someone would hear the shower start or something in the morning. Scalding hot, by the way. That's the only way to take a shower. So yeah, that part makes a lot of sense to me. Even if it's a pet, I don't think that makes a difference. I think routine is something that will bind you to the world. I like to think of it as ripples in a pond. We are the stone that fell in the pond. The ripples are our lives, the choices we make, the effect we have on the world. But even when the stone is gone, those ripples keep flowing outward. They do fade over time, and those are the fragments left behind. There's a pattern to them, and it keeps repeating, until eventually it finally fades out forever. But it's just the wave, returning to the ocean. Case file number 770, written by Der System Failed, a subway that deleted time. I'm an EMT, so every second counts. Thanks to those who came before me, we are guaranteed a 30 minutes paid lunch break with 10 minutes to pick it up. My start time for the pickup window was 8:23 p.m., 2023 military time, and I went to Subway while my medic had a lunchbox. I ran in and ordered my sandwich, turkey club with light mayo, spinach, and banana peppers. I had it toasted and paid. I ran out expecting to only have maybe 1 or 2 minutes remaining until my lunch started, but was surprised to find it was still 8:23 p.m. I asked my medic and she said I was only gone maybe 30 seconds and she thought it was a pickup. I told her it wasn't and I was gone for a few minutes at least. She just thought I was messing with her. I'm eating my sandwich now just wondering how it was made in less than a minute, including paying. Case notes for file 770. A subway that deleted time. This does seem like a time glitch. As rare as they are, especially when there's no clear possible way that it could be aliens involved. I mean, even then often it's not even time loss, it's just memory warping. Sometimes there is time loss involved with alien abductions, especially traveling distances you shouldn't be able to. But in regard to this, there's no aliens. It's definitely just some weird time glitch involving Subway, because I know, I go to Subway all the time. Usually these days I just order it online and it's ready to go when I get there. However, in the past, I mean, when I would just go in and order, it would take at least, even if no one was there and I could place my order immediately, I would, especially if I get it toasted, I mean, just that alone is 30 seconds, 30 seconds, not to mention the building of the Subway, telling them what you want, getting to checkout, them folding the sub in and wrapping it up, the checkout, paying. There's absolutely no way it could take less than less than 2 minutes, I would say. Would be the fastest. That'd be like a world record. Get the Guinness people over. So yeah, this is definitely a very small but very inexplicable time glitch. It's also peculiar because a lot of weird things seem to happen at Subway. One time I did have the strangest, most intense sensation of dread I've ever felt. Just walked into the Subway, felt like I just had to get out. I don't know why. I don't think anything happened there. I didn't really check, but there's no news like mass murder happened at the Subway or something. But yeah, I just went in, felt dread, had to leave. Maybe it was just a panic attack. I don't think I get those, but I guess that's possible. So I don't think it's really a glitch. I don't think it's related to Subway. It's just one of those odd coincidences. Perhaps because I'm always going there. Hi folks, just a quick update. As you know or may not know, I've turned on channel memberships now. There are 2 tiers. You can support the channel if that's all you want to do for $1 a month. And you'll get special emojis and a channel membership icon next to your name if you ever comment. So people can know you support, and obviously I tremendously appreciate it. And also for $5 a month you can gain access to special fictional horror stories that I'm narrating, exclusively for Patreon members and channel members. I title these as Sleepless Files, and I do think I'll release some for everyone, but mostly they'll be exclusive. So if you'd like to join and support the channel, I'd tremendously support it, of course. And everyone who doesn't just enjoys the stories, I'm really glad to have you as well. Let's get to the next story. Case file number 771, written by Volses, the beautiful voice of sorrow. A little after 7 a.m., we woke up to what sounded like an old song, maybe from the 50s. Johnny Cash voice, but even lower. And the skies are gray, repeated 3 times with some bird chirping, then stopped by itself. Only 2 speakers in the apartment. The one connected to the PC doesn't have Bluetooth and the computer was locked and nothing was open on it. When I played it, it was muted. Soundbar for the TV, but the TV is turned off. We are completely baffled and don't understand what just happened. It was also much louder than any of our speakers could have been. It's hard to recall what the sound was exactly as we were deep asleep. Happened about 30 minutes ago. We have no explanation and we also can't find the song. The song sounded like a sample was glitching and replaying. We live in a new high-rise that is perfectly sound insulated. Sound had to come from inside. When I say a song, don't think of it as an actual song. It sounded like something manufactured for a horror game as to be as creepy as possible. No one would listen to a song like this for pleasure. It's a song built to make you feel uneasy. It's not something you'd find on Spotify. It sounded like something I've never heard before. It almost sounded unreal. Even though there was crackling, it was like it was put there on purpose. And the quality of the sound was nothing I've ever heard before. It was better than any sound quality I've ever heard. It sounded more analog than digital. It's very hard to explain. It just sounded so real. Very depressing song about waking up to dark skies. Voice of the narrator in super hot VR. Delightful birds chirping and also crackling. lasted about 10 to 15 seconds. It was about as loud as a smoke alarm when it went off. The song was very loud and felt like it was coming from the environment. Perfect surround sound like wearing a VR headset, but much, much louder. We have a soundbar in front of the TV that is Bluetooth enabled. I have the Logitech gaming set of speakers which are not Bluetooth or wireless enabled, and also no antenna. Note that neither the TV or computer could have played these sounds. Computer speakers were on mute when I tried to play something. Soundbar was off. There is a ceiling speaker that I think belongs to the smoke alarm. Case notes for file 771, The Beautiful Voice of Sorrow. So part of this could be explained by some sort of tech glitch, maybe an amplification from the construction of the building. There's signals that are being picked up through the steel reinforcement, and maybe the wiring of the building is very odd, so just being plugged into the wall, there can be data transmitted. However, if it was just some song being picked up by someone else playing it, you'd expect this to be occurring very often. However, by your description, your writing, it seems like this only happened once, so that seems less likely. Also, why was the song itself glitching out? Was it part of some game? Could be, maybe. But were the idea of this being some convoluted extreme circumstance of just your speakers picking up sound from somewhere else? I'm lost because you say the sound quality was so supreme, like you've never heard before. The sound quality would be dependent on the signal, but also, of course, the speakers that you have. Even the best quality audio, if played on crappy speakers, wouldn't be very good. And by your description, it doesn't sound like your speakers are some advanced system. So they'd be as good as the speakers could be, and it doesn't seem like your speakers could produce quality audio like you described. So that's another aspect to this where, yeah, maybe it is just explained away by some tech glitch, signals being transmitted to the speakers. But even if that is the case, there's too many holes in it, especially just the idea that it should happen pretty frequently. This would definitely happen again, and you should be able to go to your speakers and physically hear it. Like just positioning your body, tilting your head so only one side is picking it up, you can detect where the source of the audio is coming from because of our brain's ability to detect where the sound wave is coming, if it's one ear or the other first. That's how we can directionally locate audio. Pretty cool, I'd say. So just listen out, see if you can determine where it's coming from if it happens again. Creepy file number 49, written by Female Disorder, A Threat in the Dark. This happened about 10 years ago, but it still creeps me out when I think about it. At the time I was 18 female, living in a more crime-prone area of downtown Savannah, Georgia, with my older sister, then 20 female. We lived together in a super old decrepit house and both worked at a nearby club. Not that it's super relevant, but we were both dancers at the time, so our work hours were odd, 7 p.m. to 2 a.m., later or earlier depending on the night. Her boyfriend, who had been living there, was in jail at the time. I know, we were real winners back then. Generally, we would both work the same shifts. On this particular evening, I was tired and didn't feel like going in. So she went without me. We didn't really have internet or cable, just DVDs and my cell phone, so I would frequently spend my nights on the porch listening to music. It was starting to get late, maybe 10 to 11 p.m., and I noticed a figure in the distance coming up the sidewalk. I didn't think too much of it. A lot of people walk everywhere downtown, and we had a pretty large homeless population. But then I realized he seemingly noticed me and crossed the street to the sidewalk that ran in front of my house. I didn't budge. I wasn't scared of much back then. I had seen a lot of crazy crap, so an unassuming man approaching at night didn't bother me in the slightest. As he got closer, I could see he was a dirty older gentleman, likely homeless. I stared down at my phone. A few seconds later, I looked up and that's when I saw him. A few feet away from me, on my porch, just standing there, staring at me. I got a chill down my spine. I didn't want to threaten the guy and potentially escalate the situation, so instead I just said, "Hey man, what's up?" He immediately started talking faster than my brain could keep up. I assumed the guy was sacked out of his mind on drugs or something. I had no clue what he was saying, but a few words were clear. "Hey baby, hang out. Fine. Stupid girl, kill." I froze. I decided to try and play it cool by asking the guy if he wanted a cigarette. He nodded, and I slowly got up to pass him to get to my front door. I explained to him they were inside, and he would have to leave after I gave him one, as my sister's boyfriend was home and I'd get in trouble for having people over to their house without permission. He seemingly accepted that. I handed him a cigarette and went to close the door. Something told me to hurry, and so I did. I slammed the door shut and locked it. I looked through the people and saw him feeling his pockets like he was looking for something. I could hear him mumbling gibberish and cursing while trying to open my door. I panicked, ran to the back door to let our 3 large dogs in, a Rottweiler and 2 pit bulls. They are sweet, but very loud and scary sounding if you didn't know them. Their barking seemed enough to scare him away. I called my sister over and over until she picked up. I was freaking out, explaining what happened. She told me to lock all the doors and she would be home in a few hours. Hindsight, I wish I had called the police, as I was terrified the rest of the night and every sound startled me even after my sister got home. I never saw the man again, and I stopped sitting outside alone at night. A week later, down the street from us, a young girl, early teens, was dragged into an alley while waiting for the city bus and was assaulted. I still don't know what came of that. They never caught the guy. I called and reported what happened to me. I still wonder if that would have been me had I not gone inside. Shortly after, we moved away and got different jobs. Case notes for the creepy file number 49, A Thread in the Night. As the tremendously famous and awesome narrator of the Darkest Dungeon video game series said, "Overconfidence is a slow and insidious killer." And I think that's a good quote. It's just true. Confidence is good if it's justified by past experience and knowledge. But there's points where you just want to say, okay, this is a dangerous situation. I shouldn't be terrified, but I should, be cautious. If you're sitting out on the porch at night and some random old man that looks homeless approaches you, crosses the street to do so, yeah, maybe just slowly work your way towards the door and lock it, see what happens from there. Be ready to defend yourself, call the police, all that stuff. It does certainly help that you have 3 large, intimidating dogs, even if they're gentle giants. Just the imposition of having that many, even one, it's a good deterrent for would-be criminals, for sure. And in this case, it seems like if someone is hopped up on drugs, they're not even processing danger properly, so having 3 would supplement that, as needed. I would say they're nature's alarm system. There's a reason we bred them to be our companions. Good at hunting and protection. Very useful. We don't deserve dogs. Well, some people don't. I think if you treat them well, it's a mutual system. And I think I hear Mr. Ben crying out for food. Yes, I think I'll give him some. Case file number 772, written by Agalagos27. The Flashbang of Life. A quick backstory. Weird things have always been acquired in my apartment. I posted a few years ago about something that happened with my partner being in my apartment, going to the restroom and slamming the door angrily, only to have him walk through the front door a few minutes later. You can't escape from the bathroom window. There are bars on it, and neighbors would hear the commotion. Also, having things end up in random spots, like my cell phone on the stove, cabinets wide open, remotes that were next to me a minute ago ending up on the table, etc. Yes, I have a carbon monoxide detector that works, and no, I don't have history of mental illness like schizophrenia, nor does my family. I was recently hospitalized this year from surgery that was supposed to be a safe procedure that people heal quickly from. After the surgery, I went through a traumatic experience, but what made my recovery worse was remembering what happened in my apartment a few years earlier. About 3, almost 4 years ago, I had a day off from school, so I was just relaxing at home watching a movie on Netflix. I went to the bathroom, came back out to the living room, and halfway through, I was pretty much blinded by a bright light, and it stunned me to where I couldn't move at all, just stand still in my tracks. I heard extremely loud yet muffled voices, and I felt like I couldn't breathe, but as if something or someone else was breathing for me because my chest was expanding so much, but I knew I wasn't inhaling or exhaling. Then I heard a loud voice say, "Okay, it's going up." Then I come to and scream out loud, "What the hell?" I had to sit down on the couch and just grasp what happened. It was the middle of the day, so I know I wasn't sleeping, and I know what sleep paralysis feels like. So here we are, years later after my surgery. It's a few hours afterward, and they give me a small meal, broth and jello, to eat. In the middle of eating, I start to feel weird, extremely weak and tingly, and thankfully there are two of my nurses in front of me typing up my notes, and I tell them something is wrong. I lay back a bit, then feel my arms droop, and I hear one of them say, "I'm calling it." They lower my bed, and I'm getting weaker and sleepier. I see more hospital staff running in, and one of them asking me, "What are you looking at?" to me, as I look up at the bright lights above my hospital bed. Then I start feeling my throat close up, and I begin freaking out, gasping for air, and a nurse starts pumping me with air manually. I start to feel less tingly and breathe better on my own, and hear someone say, "Okay, it's going up now." I was told in the ICU that during surgery, they severed an artery and lost almost 7 pints of blood. I'm grateful I didn't die, but I did have a premonition or glitch, etc. of what happened a year later, a few months ago. Case notes for file 772, the Flashbang of life. So just a side note, having bars on a bathroom window, I'd feel kinda claustrophobic with that. I'm guessing you live in a higher crime area. Also, the whole description of a bright light and hearing muffled noises, it almost sounds like a flashbang. That's why I titled the story this way. Obviously, I don't think it's an actual flashbang. It's like cops busting in, flashbanging you. I don't think that's what happened. I have noted though, along my entire journey of narrating stories, that we're able to share information subconsciously, both between each other, but also with the universe itself. There's some sort of feedback loop going on there. We're just not aware of most of it. Some people are aware more than others. And this all makes sense to me. It's just information. The method of transmission is unclear, but the information is there, so it's not that improbable. There's physical matter in the world, it's just a question of how do you move it around. Well, information is even easier, it's just energy. Energy, mass, it's all the same. But mass is bound by the Higgs boson field, which makes everything have inertia and just difficult to get around. Annoying, but it gives us cool stuff like food, so all accepted. I like to think of them as like filaments of knowledge just floating around in the ether, there for the plucking. Or it's almost like some people have an attraction or a lure that brings in this information, sort of like mosquitoes are drawn to people who excrete more CO2, things of that nature. Some people are just more bound to attract extra information that's beyond the standard stimuli in their surroundings. I wonder what it is about these certain individuals. And of course it always comes back to the main question of, yes, this information is out there, but how are you predicting it in advance? The future predictions are what just blow my mind. And to me, it shouldn't be clearly possible, at least not predicting a certain future. Maybe you just get lucky. It's just this specific future happened to be what you saw. But it could have been in a different universe entirely. Case file number 773, written by Kingdom Seeker 633, The Very Thin Demon. This happened about a year or two ago, but I remember it like it was yesterday. So a little context. My mom, 66, and I, 37 female, I live with her as I'm her caregiver since she is disabled. I'm a woman of faith, so that explains why I deal with this thing the way that I do. That being said, we often use those food service apps like DoorDash or Grubhub when we want to eat out, but don't feel like going out to eat. I think this might have been in the spring when the weather was still nice. Where we live, it gets super hot in the summer. But when the weather is nice, I like to go outside extra early to wait for our food to enjoy the weather while waiting. On this particular day, the weather was low humidity at about 83 degrees Fahrenheit. 28 Celsius for my non-American friends. It was, at most, slightly breezy. Not very windy at all. Overcast but no threat of rain. The weather conditions are important to the story. To sort of give an idea of the street layout, I live in a corner house on a 90-degree angle street. To describe it, there is a street to the left that goes west. Down that way there's at least 6 or 7 houses until the next turn. Then turns a corner right in front of our house that turns directly south. There are other streets in my neighborhood, but I didn't include them in this layout since they're irrelevant to the story. Anyway, on one of those days when we were ordering out, I went outside extra early to wait for the food. So as I was sitting outside enjoying the weather and waiting for our food, I was just looking around my neighborhood and I happened to turn my head to the west. As I was looking that way, I noticed this strange thing floating high above the houses. It was floating towards my house. If I could describe what I saw, imagine you got a black garbage bag and cut a 12 by 12 inch, 30 by 30 centimeter square from the bag. It was flat, thin, and black, as though it was cut from a black plastic bag. But I don't think that's what it was, because we all know how plastic bags move in the wind. They move with the wind, but that's not how this thing was moving. It was moving at a steady pace, slow, controlled, and weirdly enough, I noticed that the bottom edge of this square was rippling with a rhythm, sort of like it had legs that were walking. Not like it had full legs, but the left side and the right side of the bottom edge looked like they were taking turns moving. Right, left, right, left. It looked like the rhythm of walking. Also remember, it was not a windy day. There was barely a breeze. Even if it was breezy, it would have moved with the wind, but that's not how this thing was moving. I just stared at it as it moved closer to my house. I wasn't scared of it at first, I just didn't know what to make of it. So my curiosity moved me. I got up to walk closer to it to get a better look. Just as it was approaching our house, right between my house and the neighbor's house, it took a left turn. I could see the edge of it. That's how I knew it was thin. When I was that close to it, I did feel something evil about it, something sinister. When I felt that, I thought, oh hell no. I rebuke you in Jesus' name. Go back to hell where you belong. It then slowly floated away. I know that might sound funny to some, but I'm a woman of faith. That's how I was taught to deal with things that feel supernaturally evil. And something about this thing really felt off. After my experience, I wished I had recorded it, but I didn't have my phone on me. I also tried to Google what I saw to see if anyone else ever saw something like this, but I didn't find anything about it. Has anyone else seen or heard anything like this? Does anyone have any idea what this was? I'm tempted to think this was some sort of demon, since demons can manifest or masquerade as anything they want. What do you think? Case notes for file 773, The Very Thin Demon. So I've never specifically heard of anything described as a garbage bag floating in the wind, or sort of rippling through existence, but not exactly affected by the wind, as you would think a bag would be affected. But it's a very interesting way to describe some entity, some very thin demon, perhaps? And while I'm not specifically religious myself, I do think there's more going on than we can immediately understand. And so I don't know if that's God, I don't know if it's a simulation error, but it's curious that as you shouted at whatever this was, either by invoking Jesus' name or just by invoking your will manifested. Sort of like if you're threatened by an animal, it's usually a good idea to make yourself seem more threatening and just imposing, even though, if a bear is charging you, you have no chance, but it doesn't necessarily know that. So it's a good idea to make your presence known. So I wonder if it is related specifically to religion, a demon that you put at bay with Jesus' name, or just your own will forced onto it, saying, okay, maybe I can go after an easier target. Something like that. Maybe also, you weren't meant to be able to see it. Maybe just the fact that you could see it kinda startled whatever it was. Like, how is this person seeing me? They're not supposed to be able to. I think, honestly, the worst thing you can do is show fear. Whenever there's entities around, shadows, spirits, demons, don't be afraid. There's no guarantee that it will leave you alone, but it almost is like these entities, creatures, thrive on fear. Easy targets for the plucking. Make yourself as prickly as a porcupine. Probably a good idea. Case file number 774, written by Parzi Fail. Supernatural reasons to avoid prison. I've worked as a correctional officer for a long time. I've worked at facilities in Texas and Michigan. The oldest prison I've ever worked at just recently started to close in Michigan, and it got me thinking about all the paranormal experiences I've had there and in the other prisons I've worked at. I'd like to share with all of you some of the more notable paranormal experiences that I've had while working in these prisons. First off, I'd like to say that I never really believed in ghosts before I started working as a correctional officer. I started off working in Texas at an intake facility. I worked night shifts 12 hours from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. The first experience that I ever had was working on a lower security housing unit. When finishing a round, I was chatting with my partner and I heard a loud banging sound. It was like 3 a.m. at this point. Absolutely no prisoner should be out of their bunks at this time. I asked my partner if they knew what the banging was. They, being an older officer, told me bluntly that the unit we were working in was haunted. They told me the sound was coming from a door of one of the small, quiet cells in a hallway not directly visible from the officer station, and about how a prisoner had died in one. The prisoner, allegedly, died because the officers working there at the time had given them a sack of food when it was lunchtime for prisoners, and the prisoner had choked on the food and died. I really didn't believe that the unit was haunted, so I decided to go look at this door. The sound volume increased as I got closer to the door. The door itself was visibly shaking as if someone was pounding on it. There was nothing that could have been causing the door to shake like it was. I was at a loss for words. Later that night, I checked the door again and there was a steamed up handprint visible on the glass of the door's window. Another experience I had was at the same facility, but at a different housing unit. It was around 1 to 2 a.m. and I was sitting inside the officer station watching the cameras and talking to my partner. I look at one of the cameras and clearly see a prisoner sitting at a table in the day room. I turn my head to look at the day room and no one is sitting at the table I just saw on camera. I asked my partner to go check it out because no one is supposed to be out of bed yet. I roll back the time on the camera to see if I could see where the prisoner might have gone. The prisoner on the camera literally slowly fades away and vanishes completely. My partner comes back into the officer station and we both watched this video over and over. Later on that same night, during one of my rounds, I noticed a wet floor sign that got left out. I returned it to the porter closet. I get back to the officer station and look back to where the porter closet is and I see the same wet floor sign left out. I asked my partner if they're playing a joke on me or something because I just put the sign away and my partner denies doing anything with it. I go back out and make sure I put the sign back in the closet and lock the door. I get back to the officer station, wet floor sign right there in the open again. My partner and I are both watching this wet floor sign now. It starts to tip over on one end and very slowly 2 of its legs off the ground. The sign then slams itself into the ground. It then proceeds to slide quickly up the hallway and then back in front of the closet door before ceasing all movement. My partner and I refused to come out of the officer station for the rest of the night because we were scared crapless. One more notable one from Texas. I was working in an ADSEG unit, a really high security unit for prisoners that get in fights and cause a lot of problems repeatedly. We had a prisoner who was sitting in one of our closed observation cells. These cells are usually used for people who threaten to harm themselves. In the summertime, prisoners will sometimes just say they are suicidal to be put in one of these cells because they are a lot cooler and are near AC vents that the normal housing units don't have. The prisoner told me that this is what they were doing and that they didn't want to cause any problems. Later on that night, one of my partners and I were watching cameras and all of a sudden we saw a shadow moving across the floor. Eventually, it comes to the close observation cell and disappears under the door. This is where it gets totally crazy. I do a round and check on the close observation cell. The prisoner is pacing in the cell. I ask the prisoner if they are okay, and the prisoner tells me that something doesn't feel right and that they are hearing voices that aren't there. I try to calm them down, and eventually they do, and lay on the bed. Later on, my partner called for assistance because the prisoner had bit the skin off their own wrist, causing them to bleed, held them above their head, and allegedly was speaking in tongues. When I started working at prisons in Michigan, I worked at a prison that's now closing. It was built back in 1877 and is one of the oldest prisons still operating in all of the United States. There were so many small experiences that I've had here. Doors would slam, you'd hear voices, cold chills. The first really notable experience I had was around Christmas time on the 3rd shift. I was working in the oldest unit on the facility. Usually we don't have prisoners there, but we had opened the unit to separate the prisoners during the pandemic. I didn't have a partner due to how short-staffed we were, so one of the other officers set up a TV for me to keep me entertained because I'd really be far away from all the other units and get bored with no one to talk to. I do rounds for most of the night, watching TV in between them. I suddenly hear a banging noise from a door that leads to the hallway that takes you all the way to an even older, unused, condemned part of the prison. I open the door and take a look down the hallway. A cold breeze hits me, and suddenly my hair stands on end. I close the door, thoroughly creeped out. I go and sit down and start watching TV again. The TV starts flipping through channels rapidly and then stops on static. I have to get moved to a different unit because I'm scared out of my mind. One day on the 3rd shift, my work friend and I were working positions that allowed us to have a lot of free time and no prisoners to watch. We decided to explore the prison. We explored the tunnels that went underneath the prison, the old barns, the old unstaffed gun towers. We eventually decided to go look at the old condemned part of the prison from my earlier experience. There was a big metal gate that was about halfway down the hallway that had to be opened by a big skeleton key. We get back to the old condemned part, and my friend tells me about how this part was supposed to be the old segregation. We had to use flashlights to see because this section is so old it's not powered. The energy back there I won't ever forget. Just being there filled me with a feeling of cosmic dread. I asked my friend to head back, and we start to head back down to where the hallway to the gate was. My friend's flashlight suddenly dies. We make it to the hallway barely able to see anything in the almost pitch blackness. We hear something running after us, so we start running up the hallway too. My friend fumbles with the key as we hear it getting closer. We get the gate open and sprint out of there. Later on I noticed that my friend had red claw marks all over his arm. Well, that's all I got for you all. Hope you enjoy listening about these crazy events. Case notes for file 774, Supernatural Reasons to Avoid Prison. Cameras are getting better, and recording equipment is getting better. I assume in prison, the recording equipment you had there was pretty low tech, but just the idea that, we can have ring alarms and we can have cameras in our homes now and in businesses, and they're getting to 1080p or even above. Storage isn't expensive anymore. So I think we'll be able to capture more supernatural events, but editing is also becoming more prominent, and deepfakes and so on. So you see this now with videos of UFOs. There's some spectacular videos, but you always in your back of your mind say, well, this is probably just edited. So it's either the video is terrible quality and people dismiss it because it's terrible quality, naturally, or it's in good quality, but it looks too good, almost. And people just assume, well, it's photoshopped or whatever. I don't know if that's going to be enough to convince people. I think, and probably for me too, I won't be 100% convinced until I see it for myself. Still, reading stories, it's all very compelling because there's just so many of them. One thing I do wonder about spirits and echoes, if they're just fragments, filaments of people who passed away, then do they become, or are their emotions amplified? Or is it just that if you're a good person in life, then your echo and fragment will probably be a decent, entity, just floating around, not really doing anything bad to anyone, or maybe even trying to help people, guardian angels, perhaps. And then if you're a bad person and you pass away, your echo or imprint on the universe is inherently negative, and maybe it intensifies over time to become even more negative. And if you think about it, if you're in a prison, well, yeah, some people are innocent in prison, but I think most people are probably not, and especially in a hardcore prison in AgSeg, where people are especially violent and in for murder and all that. I imagine prisons are hotspots for all sorts of malicious paranormal events. Of course, if they want to be hidden, they have to be a bit more cautious in how they approach their hauntings. It's not a place I'd want to be, just in general, but especially for supernatural events as well. And one other thing I have to mention is that I think how we treat prisoners in general is abhorrent. There's a guy on YouTube who was in prison for over a decade, Larry Lawton, I'll link his YouTube channel in the comments, and he goes into great detail describing just how horrific people are treated in prison. And yes, I know. If they're criminals, you in the back of your mind you say, okay, well good, they don't deserve to be treated as humans. But I think it's a mistake. I think if all we care about is revenge or justice, as some people would describe it, well, it just leads to, it's like in Fifth Element, the movie, where there's this evil entity, and to try and stop it, we have to use violence and force and all that. Evil begets evil. If we put into the world what we don't want to be there, it's insane. It's not going to work. I mean, we do need to segregate criminals, violent criminals especially, from society. I get that. But we should treat them decently. I think you should be guaranteed safety. I think if you have an issue, the guard should actually protect you instead of being often the ones that are causing a bunch of harm. And I also think that you should have decent food. I mean, one thing he describes, Larry Lawton, is that food in prison is just god-awful. They'd use meat that had bones stuck in it. He described at one point that he was going to eat a burger. There was a piece of bone stuck in it. He chipped his tooth on it. That's how bad it is, and they use meat that's expired for years. That's just probably the worst thing you can imagine. You'd be better off eating dog food. So I don't think it's right. I'm not saying, put them up in a 5-star hotel or anything like that, but a decent standard, a baseline where people are safe and they have access, especially something they could earn with good behavior, like, having a TV, easier access to books and reading and educating themselves. Basically, our goal, I think, should be to reduce recidivism and to rehabilitate, not to punish. I mean, I would only make exceptions for truly lost cases where people are in there for life, no possibility of parole, like mass serial killers or maybe rapists and things like that, the most truly horrific people. But even then, they shouldn't be treated as subhuman, mostly segregated away, I'd say. But still, given reasonable food and healthcare and all that. Anyways, sorry for the long tangent, but I just wanted to say that because I think it's very important and not something that's often talked about, sadly.